Hi, everybody. Welcome to Global Tech Tales, where we talk with editors from around the world about the latest technology and leadership topics and hear stories from IT leaders about what they are looking for. I'm Keith Shaw, co hosting along with Matt Egan. He is the global content and editorial director at Foundry, who is also representing the UK in this podcast. This month, we are joined by Jens Doos. He is the editor in chief of CIO Germany. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Glad to be here.
All right. Today, we're going to be talking about how AI will be reshaping IT with groups already challenged to find resources and skills to support things like cloud automation and security. We now have generative AI as the next big game changer. So, this is requiring IT leaders to think about staffing processes and how much closer it works with the business and whatever else is thrown their way. Add to this an increasing number of IT leaders that are getting burned out, and it's a recipe for a lot of stress for the IT group. So we're going to start, as always, on this show with some statistics. I've got like six different stats here, so we're going to run through these as quickly as I can. A March 2025 report by the American Management Association found that many employees, 57%, said that they are not keeping up in AI. Less than half, 49%, have received training in AI. In Avix 2024 IT Trends report, shortage of skilled workers is the number one challenge. And as a result, 24% more teams are planning automation and 96% are already using AI or machine learning tools. A Data Strike survey said that 54% of IT leaders say that resource shortages are a major issue in managing modern data architecture, and ISC reports almost 60% of cybersecurity professionals say that skill gaps are significantly impairing their ability to secure organizations. Couple more stats here. A census-wide Red Hat survey found that 80% of IT leaders report an AI skills gap shortage, even as AI and cloud investment grows. And a 2025 Nash Square Digital Leadership Report, global digital leaders say that they expect to stay at one company for an average of only 3.3 years, representing that burnout. So, with all of these stats in there, how are IT departments that you talk with dealing with the lack of skills across the organization? Jens, let's start with you.
Many companies already explored AI in some way, shape, or form. So they are kind of banking on this when it comes to Gen AI and agentic AI. And they have a general skill and experience foundation they can build upon. Others are just reskilling their stuff, like career changes from the business side, for example, is a viable option. Or another solution we see is incubators and subsidiaries dedicated to AI initiatives or tech initiatives that are somewhat disconnected from the rest of the company and therefore can present themselves more attractive for new talent, um, and restuff in that way.
Yeah, so I'd build on everything Jens says, like, completely. I think I might expand it slightly and say that the rapid growth of AI is impacting organizations in two different ways from a skills perspective. Everything Jens has spoken about, right, which is directly. So, even if agents can take on roles currently being done by humans, who's going to manage the agents, right? And then there's the idea of kind of how we grow and build ideas. Like Jens says, some people it's like training at every level of the organization with a leader who's dedicated to it. Other places, let's set up an AI group and kind of incubating things. All of that good stuff, right? Keith, in your own conversation with Mark Benioff, he hit on this. Salesforce is retraining customer service staff to manage agents in the customer service space, right? But then there's also the indirect impact, which we've talked about a lot, which is building the AI ready organization, which is having a knock on effect in terms of infrastructure, cybersecurity, data analysis. That means different approaches that require different skills from what organizations have today. And with all of this, I see organizations handling these issues in wildly different ways. From a pure AI perspective, there is this idea of some combination of training and enablement for all staff, plus hiring dedicated leaders to drive forward change. But then in other roles, it's kind of hire and train just as hard as you can because no one has a perfect scenario, and there's a lot of on the job training that has to happen.
Yeah. I'm wondering if there's a balance between, companies that are just going into automation and agentic AI as a way to deal with the skills gap, but it feels like that would then lead to a skills gap on its own for the people that maybe
Yeah,
have to manage that AI, and they're not ready yet either.
I,
So it
I,
does seem to strike this weird balance.
I think that the idea of automation solving the problems of the organization is arguably more conceptual than real in most cases. So I'm seeing increased acceptance that one of the biggest routes to return on investment with AI is in exactly that area. We talked about this before, right? Making operations, including IT support, significantly, if not exponentially faster and more efficient by layering over AI with human oversight. Let the software and the compute take the strain of the first pass for the vast volume of activity so that a human can be inserted when needed most at either the strategic level or when a mission critical problem needs to be solved. Waiting, not fixing problems. I think that's kind of conceptually an idea that a lot of organizations are hooked on, but I think the reality of making it happen is challenging from a skills perspective. I don't know, Jens, if that's been your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. The same thing here. Nothing to add, frankly.
All right. Another question I had was does IT need to rethink that their processes and more quickly adapt automation within their groups? So it's not just about staffing, but it's also about some of the processes. For example, there was a story, I think I read it on CIO.com, where there was a Forrester study that showed that productivity losses from IT-related delays can cost between 1.5 million and 3 million per 1,000 employees. And most of this is basically due to waiting for like IT support desk and ticket issues and things like that. So if automatic agents or AI agents can speed up the IT help desk ticketing process, which has been around for probably 10, 15, 20 years now, is that something that they can think of to improve the losses that they might get from waiting for these things to be to solve? What are you hearing about that? Is that something that's a pipe dream, or do IT organizations need to relook at their processes?
I think they are actually relooking at their processes already, because um, first and second level support in IT is already mostly automated till you speak to actual human, and everything beyond that, I think agentic AI can tackle more, like to solve more complex tasks, and to offload the menial standard work from the IT team. So automating the classic automation of processes. Um, they are doing that, and they are doing it quite well, because operational excellence is on the top of every IT agenda in every company. So they kind of have to. I think the problem there is more cultural and less technical. But Matt, what's your point of view?
Very, very similar. I think this is one area where we are starting to see a real impact, which is, I mean, you can compare it to medical triage or even like heuristic security, which was a big term sort of 10, 15 years ago, where like instead of every case being treated in exactly the same way by a human being to start off with, you take that first pass and lots of problems can be solved using automation before you get to the piece where you need a human to be involved. I was talking to someone recently where, which will be familiar to us actually from our professional lives, where they'd gone through a big migration project, which meant lots of end users had problems, but like the problems ranged from a mission critical member of staff not being able to get online at all to some people who weren't able to like do some sort of fairly trivial things, but the ticketing system they had in place treated everything with the same level of complexity, and actually it was really straightforward to overlay a level of algorithmic triage that meant all of a sudden you went to the really important problems first with a human and other things could be fixed in a more like that sort of thing is starting to happen, I think, and it does have a real kind of ROI. It might not be the most exciting use of the technology, but it is kind of having an impact.
I think IT is learning from customer service in a way, because the AI can run a sentiment analysis on the ticket itself, and point it to the right department or to the right person in the first place. So you don't have the mission critical person not being able to get online. So I think there's quite a movement there, even though it's not that exciting.
Do you see a lot of companies that are doing this within their IT groups, or are they still in that pilot phase maybe? Or have they actually deployed these processes in their own companies yet?
My experience, they are in the piloting phase still, but are close to deployment, because I mean it's basically classic automation with AI on top. So they know how to do it, and they have use cases, as I said, from customer services. which they can build upon.
Yeah, same. It's not. I think we're in that interesting point where there's the great big conceptual ideas of how we're going to rethink our whole organization using AI, and we're going to need to rebuild the infrastructure to do it. And then there's the more tactical. Let's just do things more quickly. This is a real sweet spot thing. So it's funny because like even 2 or 3 months ago, no one was talking about it, and now a lot of people are talking about. And it's incremental as well, right? You can start to introduce levels of this and quickly test and accelerate. So I do think, yeah, it's. I would agree with Jens. In my experience, it's lots and lots of organisations are doing some version of this. Not everybody's got the case study they want to take to market and shout about, but it's happening.
Right, and that leads me to another question where, and then we've talked about this on the show before. So as generative AI gets deployed across enterprises, IT groups find themselves competing with other lines of businesses, especially when it comes to AI related projects. So it's almost like who gets the priority. I think we've referred to IT sometimes as the cobbler's stepchildren. No, what is it? The cobbler's step. Oh man, I'm gonna mess this up.
Cobbler's children
Uh,
never have shoes, right?
Cobbler yeah, right. So IT is always working with the other groups. So,
Yeah.
even Jens, you mentioned like that, they're starting to do this with customer service. I would imagine that the customer service would get automated first, and then it would go IT second. But also customer service though is external facing, and what I'm hearing is that they're doing a lot of internal projects first with AI, just in case a hallucination happens or something like that. So, are you seeing IT getting priority on some of these projects?
So if we have to make this distinction between IT and business, that's a topic for another time. But if we have to, I think the lines of business get always the priority because, in my experience, they are the ones who do the business. They are the ones where the problems. They know where the problems in the business lie that can be solved. So, and they affect the bottom line.
The businesses that can make money, yeah, I would say money probably takes priority.
Well, something we often say about our own organization, right? It's very rare an organization has a problem that can't be solved by more revenue. But I think, just adding to what Jens was saying, I do think this is all very organization dependent, and it speaks to a dichotomy we've discussed a lot on this show, which is the idea of AI inside versus AI outside. AI inside being existing processes, internal, do it faster, do it cheaper, use AI to make that happen. AI outside, which is like rethinking products and services and really kind of building things from the ground up with AI. And I think like what you're starting to see that is maybe a little bit of a change is, and I completely take Jens's point, right? I don't think every organization has this real sort of hard distinction between IT and the business. But I do think like one of the things that's starting to change is certainly at the strategic level, IT is seen as a business enabler and maybe a revenue driver, as much as it is a support function. And that means IT is both a cost center and a service center for the real business, but also a strategic partner and enabler for the core business. That is not a new thing, right? It's why we've got CIOs, it's why we've got CTOs. And it's why, on the other hand, we have IT directors. But I think AI is accelerating that because it's kind of throwing everything up in the air and creating possibilities that only IT can make happen. So maybe even that line between line of business and IT is in some cases getting blurred a little bit.
And Jens, I think before the show we talked about how you were finding that IT leaders are now finding themselves with more one-to-one interactions, correct? And so that requires some new skills that maybe they weren't using before.
Yeah, it's a constant change. Like Gen AI or the influx of Gen AI in every corner of the daily life made IT tangible, like for everyone. So it's not in the basement; it's on every screen of everyone in the company, which puts CIOs in a position where they either can use like the momentum and align and weave IT into the business even more, make it a business partner, um, and a valued partner. But the caveats are restrictions like regulatory, security, or the good old German angst that prevents the employees to use it to its fullest because it's sensitive data, right? So they have to be quick and provide a solution that's similar to like the open source open internet one, and not be a killjoy, so to speak, not to take the fun of it. And secondly, when IT is more approachable, it's also more vulnerable. and it has to do things quick. So they have to get from 100% approach to maybe let's deploy quickly and just 80% to solve a problem, and not build for eternity. So maybe the solution we build today is obsolete in a month or a year. So this connection of IT to solutions being like everlast has to change. And the business also has to recognize that if they have a question regarding this new technology, IT might not have a satisfactory answer yet, but they will get to you. And this expectation management and this management of how IT approaches problems for the business and talks to the business is basically constant change management for the CIO in the coming years, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think expectation management is a brilliant phrase, Jens. I applaud you for doing that in your second language, because you're exactly right. Like conceptually, business leaders can see potential and opportunity around AI, but there's not that many use cases where this is happening successfully. So the IT people have to somehow make it reality. And then we talked about this at the beginning, right, Keith? Like the knock-on effect. So yeah, sure, we want to run a process that's going to change the way we do things, and it's going to, save us all this time, maybe money. Okay, but the infrastructure needs to be right to do it. We talked about this previously. We might need to repatriate from public cloud in order to do this, which means we've got to find data center staff. We don't have them. Like we're going to increase our security risks, or like Jens was talking about, privacy issues exponentially. So we need staff who can help us mitigate those risks, kind of thing. And I think one of the skills IT leaders CIOs pretty much have this, but they're having to develop even more, is the ability to kind of give that news, that bad news, right? Yeah, of course, we can do what you're talking about. Can't do it today. You've got to figure it out. It's going to take a little while, and it's going to cost you in these areas that you haven't even thought about. That's quite a challenging skill set to develop and maintain, I think.
Right, and the acceleration of this technology, you've never seen anything as fast as AI and generative AI take off, right? I mean, we've all been through different technology shifts, but it never seemed to be that moving at the speed that it's moving now, right?
Yeah, and
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, go on, Jens.
it's so I heard it be called exponential growth, and this is the first in the industry, because if you deploy a new ERP like SAP or something, you can take your few years, right? If you don't act now in AI, and if you don't grow exponentially like AI does, because it's feeding itself all the time, you just get thrown out of the curve. That's just the reality.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the hype expectations too, and so does IT have to take that role of maybe tempering the hype, or at least bringing in a dose of reality?
Well, it's both, isn't it?
Is
'Cause,
that
like,
the
you
yeah.
have to, to be an enabler, you have to, like, in the most positive sense, you've got to facilitate the ability to do the conceptual ideas, whilst at the same time, I talk about this all the time, right? Like nobody's talking about sustainability. Like everybody's talking about throwing all of these new computational projects out there, like, and then maybe quantum will solve it, maybe. Like, but in the intervening time, hey, we'll just keep burning all this energy, like to do what? Like, and from a CIO perspective, that means like money. Like you've got to run these projects, and it also means skills, as we're talking about today. So I think it's on the one, it's kind of it's learning the skills of being a yes but person. Yeah, we can do that, but these are things you've got to consider. Data optimization alone is a big barrier to some of these concepts, I think.
Because of all of this, because of the acceleration, do you think that this contributes to some of the reasons that we're now hearing about CIO burnout at the leadership level, and that, you know, these these leaders are only lasting about 3.5 years? I mean, this is now, I think, shorter than ever. And CIO tenure is actually lower than CEO tenure. I was looking that up, and as of 2023, the average CEO lasts about 7 years, somewhere between 5 and 7. Uh, it just feels like is the added pressure of doing all of the um, AI projects, and then facing the skills gap and looking at your processes, looking at your infrastructure. Do you think that's just adding up to, this burnout, or is there some other reasons for this?
My opinion, this can be attributed to the general velocity technology is evolving today, and the digital transformation and a lot of strategies changes based on new technology, right? Because 3 years back, no one was including Gen AI in any kind of strategy, and now they do. And so the strategies change, and the CIOs like hearts are kind of connected to their strategy that they worked out. So I'm not surprised that we have so quick changes, but there are also other examples. For example, the CIO of the logistics company Kühne and Nagel has been there for approximately 20 years and just catered and led the change, the fundamental modernization in their IT for 20 years. And but this was because the leadership team and himself were committed to that. They said, we want to do this and we commit to that, and all the sides are on the same page. And I think this level of commitment is hard to do in these days because everything is changing so quickly.
Yeah, I think that's what I would say. It's. I think there are two separate issues here. One is, yeah, the level of kind of scrutiny and stress on the CIO is probably at the highest level it's ever been, which isn't entirely a bad thing, by the way. But so it is a very stressful role. It reminds me of like the CMO role over a few years ago. Like in the expectations are very high. You're working in a very changeable market. Like there's going to be stress and pressure, but you can't divorce that from the external environment, right? So it's also a time of economic instability, it's a time of geopolitical instability, and we're living through an acceleration in an industrial revolution. So, like, if the 10 years, 3.3 years, what's changed in that time? Probably everything, right, for a lot of organizations. So it's unsurprising that the person at the beginning of it might not be the person that's
Right.
right at the end of it. Just for the fact that they were there at the beginning of it, right? Like they'd been inside it, so they can't see what needs to happen externally. But I think what's really interesting is I do think we're at a very specific point in time, and it's one of those, that idea of like, people always underestimate how much is going to change in 5 years, but overestimate what's going to change in a year. Like, I do wonder what tenure will look like for senior executives in IT in maybe 3 or 4 years, when maybe like there's a bit more of a well-trodden path around these things, and it's not just everything gets thrown up in the air and see where it lands.
Yeah, I mean that's well, if it continues to be exponential growth, you never know if there's going to be a plateauing or at least a slowing down.
I think the longer tenure will be tied to how tightly business and IT are intertwined then, because they are merging together now because they have to. And if they are indistinguishable, if business is IT and vice versa, the job of a CIO or the new equivalent we might have then of this role might be more entwined with the business itself and doesn't have to make like this much change management, this much integration, this much talking to the business if business and IT are one and the same.
Well, I'm also wondering if it's a case where, IT was in the, to use your phrase, Jens, like they were in the basement for a while. They were hidden off. They were just kind of maintaining the computers and all of that. That was maybe like, 10, 20 years ago. But as we pushed, I think, CIO and computer world, for example, always pushed this idea that IT and business should work together. And yes, get a higher spotlight. But with that spotlight comes more pressure, and maybe that reduces the tenure. But that could just be, me assuming these things.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a level of that. Like I say, we've wanted for the CIO to be a high-profile strategic leader. High-profile strategic leaders tend to have shorter tenure.
All right. So we're at the point of the show now where we do our vote, and this question comes from Matt this week or this month. And so, do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it, Matt?
You read it. Let's stick to the normal
All
form.
right. All right. So is finding the right skills to support an AI ready organization the biggest challenge that is facing IT leaders today? And as always, yes, no, or I guess you could say it depends. So, um, Matt, since this is your question, I'll let you go first.
I always say it depends, and I will probably say that today. But I certainly think it is one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's an underestimated challenge, honestly. Because again, I think people think about the AI skills challenge specifically related to jobs that are specifically around AI, when in fact it is everybody in the organization, and it is also the knock-on effect on the wider IT provision and infrastructure. So, do you know what? I've changed my mind. Yes, it is the biggest challenge.
Okay, all right. Jens, yes or no?
For the sake of argument, I'm
you-
gonna say no, because
Okay.
I think the data is the more pressing challenge, because without data you cannot have any kind of AI, and many companies still struggle with visibility, connecting all the data points they need to get AI running smoothly. Still figuring out if they are using a data lake or the data mesh or something else. So they need to get this base covered, and then they can worry about.
I was leaning towards Matt, but then Jens, you made an excellent point. So I'm going to lean towards Jens on this. I think that there's a lot of companies that are still struggling with just that whole digital transformation process, and they're getting all of their data in a row and their ducks in a row. So I think it's a little too early to make the skills the top priority, but it's probably in the top three. I would say so. It's a little wishy-washy on my end, but yeah, I still think that there's some higher priorities, and you can never forget about security. Security is one of those top areas that they always have to be thinking about as well. So, all right, thanks everybody for this conversation. Again, Jens from Germany and Matt from the UK. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Keith.
All right, and we're going to be back next month to talk about how artificial intelligence is affecting the pursuit of IT careers. So if you like this episode, be sure to add some comments below and check out our other Tech Talk shows such as Today in Tech, CIO Leadership Live, First Person, and Demo if you are looking for product demonstrations. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.